This is a sneak preview, if you will, a early showing of a film that's being showed nationwide on the public broadcasting. In the Boston area, this film will be shown December 19th at 9 p.m. on WGBH Channel 44. So we encourage you to tell your friends and to let them know about the story of what you're about to see. The story of trafficking in Nepal and India. Just a couple of quick things about the film itself. Andy Levine, the young filmmaker who was the director for this film, is a local Bostonian, and the film was produced about a year and a half ago. And Andy would normally be here. He now lives in Utah. But he is a proud father of a new boy just a few days ago. And even Andy, his wife, of course, and his parents who live close by here, Carol and Barry Levine, were going to join us, but they decided to have a family reunion. But anyway, Andy Levine is the one we thank for being the director of the film. The producer of the film is a woman named Geraldine Dreyfus, and the name may not be known to you, but she's well known in the documentary area. And all I want to be sure is that we publicly thank Geraldine for doing everything that Andy didn't do. Without Geraldine, this film would not exist. The folks who were helpful on the film itself, as you know, Tim Robbins did the voice override, the male voice. Winona Ryder did the female voice. And for you film fans, you may not know that Tim Robbins, his brother David Robbins, did the music score for this. So it's the Robbins family collaborated. The funding for this film came from a number of folks. I will just mention two. First of all, we want to thank the Gates Foundation in Seattle, Washington, for making this possible. We also want to thank locally the Fireman family for being very generous and helping with the funding of this film. Immediately after this film, there's going to be a panel discussion. And it's an opportunity for you all to ask any questions that you may have, either about the specifics of the tragedy in Nepal and India, or on a wider scale about worldwide trafficking. We'll answer any questions you may have. We'll have the panelists here. I'll introduce them later. I just wanted to encourage you to stay for the panel discussion because we're very fortunate to have with us this evening Laura Lederer, who has taken the time to fly in from Washington this evening to participate in this and is taking a very early flight back to Washington tomorrow. Laura is the Senior Advisor on Trafficking, the Office of Secretary of Global Affairs in the U.S. State Department. I know Laura because she visited us in Nepal and visited Maiti Nepal. There's no one more committed, and she's capable of answering any of your questions on a very global scale. So we're thrilled to have her. She's just arrived, and she'll be part of the panel. So I encourage you to stay for the panel. One final note is, just let me explain just briefly what you'll see. The film My Day My God Died begins with a series of stories of young ladies, Nepali young women, who were trafficked. All of these young women are known to Brigitte, my wife, and me, and they tell their story. The movie then goes on into India, where Sanlap, a sister organization with Maiti Nepal, who works in India, and you will begin to get an explanation of the trafficking, what happens to the girls, et cetera, and then gradually the film will shift to Maiti Nepal. And Maiti Nepal is an internationally recognized organization and won many international awards, and my wife, Brigitte Cazalis Collins, who you'll meet this evening, is the official U.S. representative. So that's the way the film will go. It'll run about an hour. And then we'd love to have you stay for the panel discussion. So I thank you for coming.
र त्यो पेप्सी खाइसकेपछि म बम्बई आइपुगेँ। किन 50,000 बेचेर गएको हो।
50,000 rupees, less than $1,000, the price of a life. According to the United Nations, 2,500 women and children throughout the world disappear every day to be sold into sexual slavery. Meena, Anita, and Maili are but 3 of the 15 Nepalese girls trafficked daily, often by someone they trust. They wake up alone in Bombay's Kamthipura district, a veritable sexual marketplace of over 200,000 women and children, a captive population greater than that of Salt Lake City. This dense labyrinth of lanes and alleys is the largest concentrated red light district in the world. Even the tourists know it is called the cages.
त्यस्तो जग्गामा बेचेर आउनु भएछ मलाई थाहा थिएन अनि बेलुकादेखि 6 बजेदेखि त्यस्तो काम गर्न लगाए काम गर्न नमान्दाखेरि कस्तो गर्थ्यो मलाई उनीहरूले कुर्थ्यो कति जना मान्छेहरू गर्थे समातेर गर्न लाउँथे मलाई नमान्दाखेरि 8 वर्ष 7 वर्षमा गएको थिएँ।
One day she is a child, the next day she is a slave. It is as sudden and profound as that.
अनि त्यहाँ जाने यस्तो उसले घरवालीले के यस्तो बेचेर तल यस्तो काम गर्नुपर्छ भनेर मलाई चारकै हात खुट्टा बाँधेर कोहीले हात समातेर यस्तो बलात्कार गर्नु मलाई लगायो कि जबरजस्ती। अब तँलाई बेचेर गयो यहाँ काम गर्नुपर्छ भनेर भने तेरो बाउले तिर्छ कि क्या भने त्यो अर्कै त्यो कस्तो थियो एउटा केटी त्यसले अनि हिर्कायो कि पहिला अनि त्यहाँदेखि पछि अनि मान्छे खै एउटा बुढो मान्छेले त्यो कोठामै पठाइदिएको त्यति कति दिनसम्म त्यस्तो नराम्रो काम गर्ने मान्ने हिर्कायो जमिन मुनि बेचिदिन्छु भने अनि
बताया तो उसने जो ऐसा लड़का पास जाना है पुल्लू को जो बोलता है ऐसा मानना है ऐसा बोला था। मैंने बोला पुल्लू को जो करना है तो मैं उसका और थोड़े करना है कहा ऐसा बोला। यहाँ आया ऐसा मानना चाहिए नहीं तो मम्मी ने बहुत मारेगा ऐसा बोला था। कभी कभी ऐसा बाल पकड़ के ऐसे घुमा के धक्का देते नीचे पकड़ के मारते गले पे पैर डाल के दबा देते नाक से खान से अंदर खून आने तक उन लोग को नहीं छोड़ते।
So that rape continued for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days, for 10 days till she stopped protesting. You cannot say no. When you go as a child who's being forced into prostitution, the force exists there from day 1 till the day when you stop saying no. So till then the beating, the abusing, the going without food for hours, this kind of torture is going to continue. It's a part of routine.
दिल को कैसे भी तो मेरे को मार डालेगा मैं भी ठीक है मैं खुद कर लेगा करके मैं धंधे पे मैं निकल गया था खुद निकलने के बाद में
they go through experiences which leave them totally scarred even physically for the rest of their lives and something which they cannot overcome at any stage.
They'll try cigarette burning, they'll try acid, they'll try threats against the family, they'll do whatever it takes. And oftentimes they will actually just take her to a room and they'll have 6 guys and they'll just rape her and they will rape her and they will rape her until there's nothing left of that soul of hers. Ultimately, every girl will break.
मलाई बेच्ने घरमा पनि म भएको घरमा पनि 2 जना केटी त्यसै गरी मर्यो लिएर आएर त्यस्तै बिहान लिएर आको भनेपछि 24 घण्टा पनि बाँचेन त्यो केटीहरु अँधेरो कोठामा गएर बसेछ बस्दाखेरि सबै ठाउँमा मान्छे थियो अनि त्यहाँ तिनीहरु 2 जना अर्को कोठामा लगेर सुताको अनि 2 जनै के रे सल बानेर मरेछ
Girls describe it in terms of the day that I was sold was the day that my God died.
They would say in Bangla, jedin shob shesh hoye gelo, and the day everything finished.
That's enough. Could you stop the film so we could use the time for the panel, please? Just a couple of quick notes because they're frequently asked questions while our panelists get ready. People ask about those pictures in the brothels. Were they staged? They were not. Cameras were put in the glasses of some of the men, and they were willing to go in and take pictures through these special glasses. The other thing is that you noticed a lot of children in the film, and the Friends of Maiti Nepal, as I say, who are based here in Boston, and Brigitte is the chairman, and we'll talk to you in a minute. We have just are finalizing an agreement with the Home of Little Wanderers here in Boston to begin a adoption program so that hopefully some of these children can find their way here to the United States and benefit the charities as well. Because we have just about 45 minutes, by the way, if you have any interest in discussing with us the work of Maiti Nepal, we're on the website friendsofmaitinepal.org. We have a brochure that we'd be happy to have you take with you at the end, and we'd be happy to discuss it with you. I'm going to cut the introductions short so that we can address your questions. I just wanted to remind you that Laura Lederer on the far right has been gracious enough to fly in from the U.S. State Department this evening. Laura has shown immeasurable willingness to help in all facets of this, a prior academic degree and now working at the highest levels of the State Department, and she can answer your questions about global questions or about particular problems. She was willing to come to Nepal with Brigitte and me last year and visited Maiti Nepal and has a first-hand observations. Dr. Tom Cottle, the moderator and also a panel member because he can contribute a great deal as a professor of education at Boston University, and the author of over 30 books on children's issues, family issues, and the injustices to the above. On the left, on your right, is Brigitte Cazalis Collins, my wife, Executive Director of the Friends of Maiti Nepal. The story is very simple. Brigitte and I lived intermittently in Nepal for 12 years. Brigitte witnessed this injustice and started working with Anyarata Koirala years ago. Anyarata visited the United States this year, and Brigitte arranged for her to speak at Harvard, at Wellesley, and at Brandeis University. In 2001, she formed a 501c3 corporation. The goal is, one, what we're doing tonight is awareness, and number two is to provide a vehicle for any contributions to Maiti Nepal. So without any further introduction, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Cottle, who will take charge for the rest of the evening, and we welcome your questions, and please, let's start, Tom.
I thank you all for coming. Thank you, Joe. We'll start with Laura Lederer, and I just, as a word to you, I suspect that when you see this film for the first time, maybe the last thing in the world that you would like at this moment is to have people talk, and that you might need to collect your thoughts, and I understand that, but because we're pressed for time, I thought I would ask Laura Lederer to speak for a few moments, then have Brigitte Cazalis Collins speak for a few moments, and you are free then to ask questions or offer comments. I want to point out to you that because of the WGBH project, you will be taped one way or another, either visually or audio, so you should know that you will be here in perpetuity as you ask your questions. So let me have Laura Lederer speak first, please.
Thank you, Tom, and I want to thank also Joe and Brigitte Collins for inviting me here, and Andrew Levine, who I've known since he began the work on this film, which I think is one of the most powerful films that tells the story of what has happened to women and children who've been trafficked into prostitution. And I always, when I'm speaking, I'm always asked, what's the definition of trafficking? And I always use the story of one or another of the young women that I've talked to, because it illustrates so much more powerfully what it is that is the tragedy of trafficking. Because the film does that so well, if you just think of the stories of these young women and multiply that by the hundreds of thousands that we know are being trafficked all over the world, you'll get an idea of the scope of the problem. And I want to talk to you just very briefly, 5 minutes, about what the U.S. government is doing and its commitment, our commitment to ending trafficking worldwide. And then I know Brigitte's going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Nepal and India. And then we definitely want to hear from you, because we want to partner with you on this. We cannot do this ourselves. No one government can do it by itself, and we need to partner with individuals, with nonprofit organizations, with faith-based organizations in order to put an end to this. It's just like the slavery of the 17th and 18th centuries in the United States. We need to build a critical mass of people who just say no, and that's the only way we're going to end it. So let me just say that 6 years ago, in 1998, we realized with the first sex trafficking case in the United States, a group called the Cadena brothers were trafficking young women and children from Mexico into the United States through Texas and through Alabama, Louisiana, and then into Florida, and circulating them through a series of trailer brothels in Florida and South Carolina. And the stories that these young women and girls, some as young as 10, 11, 12 years old, told to the Senate and the House galvanized a broad-based coalition of women's rights groups, children's groups, human rights organizations, faith-based organizations, a bipartisan coalition that came together in a very powerful way at the end of President Clinton's administration. It was the only law that passed at the end of that administration, and it brought along with it the Violence Against Women Act and the Stalking Act and many others, because everyone knew that it was the only law that was going to pass in that last session. And the law provides a comprehensive approach to trafficking, so I just want to take a couple of minutes to tell you about it, because it can be used as a model worldwide. And one of the things that we're trying to do that Tim Robbins mentions in the film is urge and encourage countries all around the world to pass their own laws like this one that have a three-pronged approach: prevention, prosecution, and protection, and that deal not just with the law enforcement side, in other words, a criminal statute that has strong penalties, but also with the human rights side of this and with the human side of this, because unlike drug trafficking and arms trafficking, when you're talking about human trafficking, you have a real live person that's being bought and sold, and so you have a victim that needs to be taken care of, that needs to be rehabilitated, that needs to be restored. And as you can see from what these young women and the children talked about in this film, the devastation that takes place when you're trafficked into prostitution is comprehensive. It's a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual devastation. And so to restore and rehabilitate and return children and women to society will take an enormous effort. So the law, the U.S. law, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that's mentioned in the film, does a number of things. First, it broadened the definition of trafficking. We had laws on rape and kidnapping, and some people said, well, you can just use those laws. Well, no, you can't, because that just gets to the rapist or the kidnapper. And we wanted a law that got to the whole pipeline of activity, from the recruiter to the transporter to the harborer to the buyer to the seller to the brothel manager, the brothel owner, the guards, everyone who's involved in that pipeline of activity. And so the first thing that this law does is name all of those people who are participating in this criminal activity. These are organized criminal cartels that are doing this trafficking. Second, it increased penalties to 20 years to life. We had a Transportation Act before that was based on the Mann Act that had a maximum 5 years. And in the Kadena case, when Rosa, a 13-year-old, who was trafficked into the United States and used and abused and forced into abortions and back into the brothel the same way that they're talking about here. When she was rescued, we had no trafficking law, and so the traffickers got very small sentences. So now we have sent a message to the traffickers that we take this as seriously as we take drug trafficking and arms trafficking, and if you're caught, we're going to send you away for a good long time, possibly for life. Third, it has this victim-centered approach that I talked about that includes something brand new, and we're the only country in the world that does this right now, the T visa, which allows us to offer those who will help us to catch the traffickers. It's not a mandatory requirement, but responding to reasonable requests from the Department of Justice to help us apprehend and prosecute and convict traffickers can have a T visa, which gives them 3 years in the United States temporarily, and then possible permanent residency if the trafficking victim, the survivor, wants to stay. And again, we're encouraging countries all over the world to do this, because right now in every other country in the world, when these young women and children are found in the brothels, they're summarily deported back to the country of origin, oftentimes just to be re-trafficked. And fourth and finally, it authorizes and appropriates a huge amount of money to begin to address the problem. The first year it was $60 million, the second year it was $120 million, and now it's over $200 million, and the President has also put aside a special fund of $50 million, because we know that without the money, the law is only as good as the paper that it's written on. And so, and these monies are being split half and half domestically and half internationally. And so we've created a kind of a carrot and a stick. The carrot is the monies to be used to help them draft and countries draft and pass laws, to set up shelters, to train their law enforcement officials, and then the stick, which is mentioned in the movie also, which is sanctions for those countries that do not demonstrate that they are making significant progress in addressing the trafficking problem. And we believe that you really need both. You need to offer help, but you also need to at some point say, look, you're just not taking this seriously. And so the U.S. has done that. And then finally, and we can talk more about some of the other things that the U.S. government is doing, but once the law passed, then the executive branch of the government goes into action. And there are about 18 agencies in the U.S. government that play a role in addressing trafficking, everything from the Department of Justice, Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of State, where I work, to the Department of Homeland Security for the border issues, and each of them has designed a strategy, and we are now working together in a President's Interagency Task Force on Trafficking it's a cabinet level agency chaired by Colin Powell and soon to be Condoleezza Rice. and attended by the Attorney General, the Director of the CIA, the head of Labor, head of Health and Human Services, head of the USAID, and many other of the agencies. And that's important because it sends a message that we have the political will at the highest levels that streams down into these agencies, and we're also encouraging other governments to do the same thing, not to have bottom level or mid-level participation or programs, but actually to involve the presidents, the prime ministers, the cabinet level people, so that we send a message that this is a contemporary form of slavery that we want to stop. There's so much more that I can talk to you about, but I want to hear what your concerns are and how we can work together. And so I think that's enough for now. Thank you.
Wonderful. And we will give you an opportunity to ask your questions of Laura. Let me turn the attention now to Brigitte Cazalis Collins, an old, dear friend. She's not that old, she's a dear friend.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I won't take your time because I, just like Laura, would like to give you the opportunity to ask your questions. But I would like to acknowledge two persons in the room. And one is Sarah. Sarah is the project director. And thank you, Sarah. And thank you to your better half, because I know he works a lot also. And I also would like to give you the opportunity to meet someone who, more than anybody I know, could have been one of these ladies, and her name is Bishnu Maya. And Bishnu is what is called a Dalit. And Dalit is really what we call in English an untouchable, that is to say the lowest of the lowest of the lowest castes in Hinduism. And she's here. She did not go, she's not a victim, she was schooled, but she is devoting her life to her sisters in the villages to make sure that none of them will ever live what you saw on the screen tonight. And I just would like to quote Anuradha when I asked her, Anuradha, what can I do for you? And, excuse me. And she said, please tell the world about my girls. And I'm trying to do that. Thank you.
I'll give you an opportunity to ask your questions and to make your comments. A brief commercial. We're still in America. There's a commercial. I want to remind you first, WGBH Channel 44, on December the 19th, this film will play in a slightly abbreviated version. Please, please, please tell anybody you know. Stop a stranger on the street and tell them to stop everything at 9 o'clock and watch. You can get a tape of this if you correspond with friends of MaitiNepal.org. You can get a tape. So you can have this tape to show people at your place of work, at your school, wherever. I suspect, tragically, there are enormous numbers of people who don't know about this, don't know about trafficking, certainly would never expect it to occur in the United States, and will be as moved, surely, as we have been by this film. So let me take your comments. I'm going to reserve a few minutes at the end to make some comments, if I may. But the person in the back, forgive my eyesight. Yes. Very loudly, too.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to see this film, and it's a pleasure to share these moments with you. I have 3 questions for the representative from the State Department. The first one is, I'd like to know, when would the United States sign the treaty on the rights of the children? The second question that I have is, I understand from the Protection Project that fraudulent international adoption is now being included in the definition of trafficking. And from what I understand, over 3,000 children were adopted from Guatemala last year, 98% of them to U.S. citizens. And there's been great outcry by UNICEF and other child protection agencies that many of these adoptions are fraudulent. And how soon will we be able to do something in terms of stopping that sort of trafficking as well, which is also related to sex trafficking and prostitution, because many of these children are taken from young girls or kept in brothels in Guatemala? The other question that I have is, on July 26th, U.S. NGOs that work in maternal and child health and development programs were informed that they had to sign a rider on their money that they receive from AID that says that they won't work with people who are involved in trafficking, which is very good. But the other part of that rider is that we can no longer work with any agency or institution that might be advocating the decriminalization of prostitution. And that puts a lot of fetters on our arms, because in some cases, decriminalization is one of the best ways to protect women who have been exploited for prostitution, and what can be done to make the language of that rider a little bit more friendly for those of us who already are working with women who are being exploited for prostitution, and now we can't do very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll take them in order. The CRC. I really am not sure that the U.S. is going to sign the CRC, but in terms of this issue, the U.S. has already signed and ratified and deposited at the UN the Convention on the Sale of Children, Child Pornography, and Child Prostitution, which is a much more powerful document for purposes of sex trafficking than the CRC. The CRC has one article, Article 34 A, B, and C, which is a very weak article. The Convention on the Sale of Children and Child Pornography and Child Prostitution, on the other hand, has a huge series of articles that address every single possible permutation of the sex trafficking of children. And the U.S. was the 14th country to sign that, and now there are 40 countries, and that's going into force. So in this regard, I think at least we're more than covered. We're in the leadership position. So that's the first question. Answer the first question. Second question: in terms of the illegal adoption, there are actually two issues: adoption for illegal purposes and illegal adoption and adoption for illicit purposes. I don't believe that the TVPA, which is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, addresses that. I do believe it's covered in the United Nations Protocol, and so in terms of the international conventions, that's included. Our country will have to address that in a different law, because it is not part of the U.S. law right now. I do know that there's a lot that the government is doing. They've just prosecuted an adoption agency on the West Coast that was illegally trafficking children in Cambodia. And so they are working on cases, but there will have to be a specific law passed to address the specifics of adoption, because we want to encourage legitimate adoption and make sure that it's done right, and at the same time discourage the adoption that's for illegal purposes or illicit purposes. And then thirdly, I didn't mention, I do have in my speech, but I wanted to field questions. I did have a mention of the National Security Presidential Directive, which President Bush signed last February. And in it, he links trafficking and prostitution and says that prostitution is inherently harmful to men, women, and children, not just women and children, but men, women, and children, and that prostitution fuels trafficking, and for that reason we don't want to encourage the legalization of prostitution. On the other hand, we are very much supporting decriminalization of prostitution. Sweden, for instance, has a law that decriminalizes prostitution but criminalizes patronizing. And if you think of human trafficking in the same way you think of drug trafficking, with the supply, demand, and distribution, what we're trying to do is get at all of the aspects of this criminal activity. The supply and demand are the women and children. The supply is the women and children, the demand is the customers, the users, and the distribution is the traffickers, and we're trying to address all of that. If you have a law that decriminalizes prostitution but criminalizes patronizing, getting at the demand side of it, the U.S. is going to support that. The only thing we are not supporting is the legalization of prostitution, because we believe that open brothels fuel the trafficking. You have to fill those brothels with something, and for the most part around the world, those brothels are being filled with trafficked individuals.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious, I have a question. Since this isn't a regional problem, but a worldwide problem, okay? And as we said in the movie and discussed that there's a lucrative market for this kind of child sex trade in Europe and here in the United States, when on any given day there might be 50,000 or so underage children involved in this, then who are the customers? I'm saying, this must be a very expensive and lucrative trade. I mean, this is a lot different from going to a brothel in Bombay or prowling around in a car in the combat zone. You're talking to something that is a lot more, I don't know, sinister, let's put it that way. And I'm just curious as to what the State Department or, what's your take on that? The fact that there must be some kind of market for this kind of stuff here in this country.
I think it's a very, very good question. And indeed, we focused in the first 10 years mostly on the women and children and on the victims and getting shelters going and getting service providers briefed and up to speed on how to provide a comprehensive set of services for those who've been trafficked. And we focused on the law enforcement side, which is bringing the traffickers to justice, but we have not focused on the demand side, and I think that's been lacking. And I do believe that in the next couple of years you're going to see the State Department and the Justice Department and the Health and Human Services Department all looking at ways in which we can develop new innovative programs on the demand. Everything from John schools in the United States, we have these new programs. They're kind of like when you get a trafficking ticket for speeding or reckless driving, and you can go to school and get it erased from your record. First offenders who frequent brothels can go to a John school and begin to learn about what it is that's actually going on in the buying and selling of a human being. And also begin to learn about this aspect of the trafficking of women and children into it and the forced and fraud and coercion that's going on. And then we need to develop innovative programs I think, to reach young men at a much younger stage, young boys and young men, to teach them that it's not okay to exploit. And you may want to say something about that later, but I think this is something that is really lacking right now.
Do you want to say something?
Well, I'd like to say that in the past 10, 15 years, throughout the world, we have really done a wonderful job in empowering women, helping them, develop, get to an education, and we are doing it slowly but surely. But I strongly feel that we have completely forgotten the other half. I see it in Nepal, in programs in Nepal, in India. The men's side has not been looked at. We don't educate the man. It's good, it's nice to say, State Department should do this or the government should do that, But what about men? It is a cultural issue which I'm afraid throughout the world we have not. The dad, the father, the brother, the cousin of that girl has not been educated. And we are lucky in the West that we have laws, but in many countries that is not the case, and the girl is still considered as a disposable commodity. And so we have to work on that very hard. That's my feeling.
Way in the back.
Hi, thank you so much
Hi.
for coming. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful. My name is Davis Fisher. I'm actually studying the subject. I have two questions, actually. Thank you very much for everybody for coming. My first question is, I'm curious as to why the United States is actually not assessed when they do the trafficking report as of 2004. I mean, it's very clear that there's a recognition that this is an issue in the United States, and it would seem to me like country data sheets, just like you see in the other countries in a ranking, would be fairly appropriate.
question I have is, what kind of propensity is there right now in communities addressing trafficking to actually position the women themselves and give them the training that they need, and I'm talking tangible, sustainable skills that they need in order to challenge their own oppression? I mean, really, really finding ways for them to be sustainably engaged and participating in addressing their own issue. And I agree very much with you that the man's side has not been addressed in the research that I have done. But I'm thinking back to the United States history, and if you had asked white people quite a few hundred years ago to give up their slaves and just be educated about it, that wouldn't have gotten the job done. I think that it's really about empowering the women to find not only their voice but their strength in carving a new identity bracket for women in these countries, especially given systems like the caste system. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Take the first, the second.
Go ahead.
Laura, why don't you take the first? Brigitte will take the second.
Thank you for that question. The U.S. government does assess itself. The first year that the TIP report came out, I was in the TIP office and we did not assess ourselves. But the law very clearly requires that the U.S. assess itself. The problem is the State Department cannot, by law, assess the U.S. We only work abroad. And so the job was turned over to the Justice Department, and in 2001, 2002, 2003, and this year we will also assess ourselves. I don't know that we are given a tier rating, but there's a very thorough investigation as to how the progress we're making in terms of the scope of the problem, and our prevention programs, our arrests, prosecutions, successful convictions, the victim shelters and the services provided, the issues of corruption, the issues of border patrol and border security, all of those are looked at. And you can find that on the website, on the Justice Department website. And there's a link to it also on the TIP office, the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons website.
On empowerment, did you want to speak on empowerment?
You're right, empowerment is, but let me give you an example. As my husband said, we live in Nepal many months a year. And we have been empowering women for many years. Do you know that most of these women, and I'm talking from lower class to upper class, still kneel at their husband's feet in the morning, no matter how much we have empowered them? So it's beyond the cultural. We cannot bring from our own Western society and values of quote-unquote liberated women. We cannot do that. And I'm sorry for being so strong, but I think we have missed the boat to a certain extent by bringing that to the countries instead of letting it happen and grow by giving them the tools to do this. And I'm afraid that I'm one to say that we have failed in that area. And, but I agree with you. Nevertheless, I need to express that. Because we've been here, we have been in Nepal, which I know very well, for 50 years, if only in contraception. Nepal was 12.4 million people then. There are 27 million, and there are almost as many groups of people who are trying to bring contraception to the country, and we haven't succeeded. So we have to really look very carefully at that aspect. I'm sorry, this is something that's very dear to my heart. Thank you.
In the back.
That kind of brings to mind, I thought, with major drug manufacturers making billions and millions of dollars and condoms made all over the U.S., is there any major industry, any major part of the health industry that's willing to donate or to assist in the cause?
Do we know?
Let me, okay, go ahead. Please, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. It's very complex, and I think I'd like my husband to come up here and address it. But basically, the donor countries also want to make sure that to find their money, to get their money back. I'm sorry. And so we really would rather give the condoms or have them manufactured here and send them abroad rather than have the countries themselves produce them. We are changing that. That was many years ago, and thank God we are catching up and we're changing the point. And even Kathmandu does have one or two condom factories. One or two. A couple of factories. So we're getting there. No, we are not yet being approached by any pharmaceutical or medical company to help us with the medicine. But I have to also say, although I don't know too much about it, but I know enough to say that India is a fabulous country in terms of developing drugs. And as you may know, they've been fighting with big Western pharmaceutical companies to try to get patents or break patents. And so they are manufacturing a lot of drugs which are much, much cheaper than the Western. So we are getting through India. It's getting more accessible, but we are very far. The pharmacy of Maiti Nepal is one of the things that made me cry when I first went there. It is bare.
A quick word from Laura.
I just want to say that I'm going to take that suggestion back to the State Department because I think it's very important to develop partnerships with private corporations and private businesses that are in the business of making the drugs and other contraceptives and others. So I'll bring that back to the President's Interagency Task Force meeting. Thank you.
Yes, the woman right there, please.
I was especially stunned and excited to learn about the number of abortions that a lot of these girls, women are having, and I'm surprised that in the brothels themselves, use of the pill would be advocated by the brothel owners themselves. So I was just curious if that form of contraception is ever prevalent, or if you can comment on that.
Do you know Brigitte?
I'm sorry to bring it back to the cultural, but I guess that's the only way I can explain it. You're looking at those ladies and those girls and those women as, may I dare say, human beings. And they are not over there. They not only are not human beings, but they are also women. And they are from low caste. If you see, most of those ladies have dark skin. Very few Brahmins are in the brothels. So you are again addressing a subject which is cultural. And those brothel owners, who by the way are eunuchs, so I won't go further, but a lot of them, I can't pronounce that word, right. Eunuchs. They don't care. They don't care. This is money. This is money producing. Those women have no soul, no body. Yes, they have a body to be sold. So you must put yourself into that context in order to just as Anuradha said, you must get inside of you to understand, and then we can do something about it and try to understand. But this is really very important. And is that answering your question?
I would think for the sake of the brothels, just in the crude sense of monetary profit, it would benefit them for these women not to be out of work.
It doesn't cost them anything to have, if she dies, there is another 15 coming up, 20, 30, 50, and it's much easier for them to have a coat hanger crack coming in than to take her to a hospital or to buy the abortion pills, and that's very sad.
The other thing is, for instance, in the United States, in the Kadena case, the men bought a ticket, which was a condom. When they went in, it was $20 a condom, but many of them did not use the condom, and these young women would get pregnant and they would have the forced abortions and be back in the brothels. We've tried to put a new policy forward that is not just harm reduction, in other words, handing out condoms or handing out pills, but also report and rescue, so that the young women and children are actually rescued from the slavery-like and slave conditions that they're in, as opposed to just reducing the harm in those conditions.
There's Yes,
Yes,
please.
I wanted to ask, I wonder how is the U.S. government addressing the situation of American girls who are coerced and abducted into prostitution in the U.S., American-born girls? And I understand that the law on international trafficking provides help for foreign-born women. For instance, if there's a raid, the Russian women and the Thai women will get help and counseling, housing, sometimes a visa, as you mentioned. But as far as I know, the American girls in that same raid wouldn't get anything in the way of help getting out of prostitution. And I wonder, are you planning a similar law to provide help for American girls who are prostituted and want to leave?
Thank you. It's a very good question. Actually, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act says within and across borders. So for every country, including the United States, we consider the intranational trafficking to be covered by this law, as well as the international trafficking. But you're quite right that the law was mainly designed to deal with the 50,000 that the CIA was suggesting were coming across the U.S. borders at that time from, roughly speaking, a third, and a third from Eastern Europe and Russia and the newly independent states, a third from Southeast Asia and China and Asia, and a third from Latin America, Mexico, and so on, up in through the what we call the bilateral corridor. There is a bill that's been drafted and has just been introduced, I believe, by Deborah Price and Senator Cornyn, which is a domestic trafficking law that is going to address the domestic aspects of trafficking, and particularly in our big cities, the children who are being trafficked into prostitution.
If you will, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a quick follow-up question. And it really is a request that you also consider girls who may not fall in the definition of trafficking, but who have run away from home for one of many reasons and get into drugs, get into prostitution, but get as much victims as these girls we're seeing tonight. So I hope that you consider them.
Absolutely. In our laws, any child who's found in a brothel or who's found in a condition of sexual exploitation is per se trafficked. We don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. They are considered a trafficking victim.
If you will indulge me, there seem to me to be two themes tonight at least. One is this horrific problem of trafficking. The other is, and it's a deadly issue. When Brigitte brought the film to my own class at Boston University, these kids, they're not kids, these young men and women were simply so devastated that it took us 10, 15 minutes to pull ourselves together before they could even ask Brigitte a question. The hopeful part was in the body and in the spirit, indeed, if I may say without embarrassing her, of Brigitte Cazalis Collins, because she brought to us Maiti Nepal. In this spirit, if you will just indulge me, I want to speak to this matter. There was a wonderful French philosopher by the name of Emmanuel Levinas, who said that the most ethical act that any human being can ever engage in is an act which is not just rational and voluntary and chosen. It is the experience of looking into a person's eyes and, in his words, being held hostage by their gaze. But hostage is a frightening word, but all it means is a pledge to give lodging. By hostage, by being held hostage, all Levinas meant was that it is our responsibility to take responsibility for this person who we are holding hostage or who is holding us hostage in their gaze. Remarkably, this notion of lodging and mother's house seems to me to be absolutely appropriate. Even more ironic for me is, as I watch this film, if I can separate the horrors of it all and the pain of it all, I just see one gorgeous face after another. I have never seen a collection of more beautiful girls in my life. Please don't think I'm speaking amorously. I'm speaking as a father of two daughters and a grandfather of two daughters. And when I see the beginning of this film, it strikes me that Levinas may have a point, because the very opening of the film is one pair of eyes after another pair of eyes looking at us, pleading with us would be one way of saying it, but Levinas is very clever, and he says, these eyes summon us to action. They summon us to take responsibility, but only for eternity. Only for eternity, where there is no payback. And he says something else, and it comes ironically from a Jew, from a Christian tradition. He says, it's not that we do it for our family, for our friends, for my daughters, our daughters, my wife is here, our granddaughters. We do it for the stranger, welcome the stranger in the midst. And so he ends up saying at one point, which I think is quite remarkable, the truth be told, genuine seeing is believing in the other and the self, believing in otherness and selfness, but only that is if one is willing to risk responding, as Anuradha does, to the summons, take the responsibility for the other, and in looking back, meet the gaze, underwrite human possibility, and affirm the miraculous stranger. One more thought. It's a story that goes way back to a conference in New Orleans that had nothing to do with trafficking, except it had to do with the escape of the Hmong people on the China Sea soon after the war in Vietnam. A rabbi interviewed one Hmong family, and this man spoke about the journey across the China Sea, going on one of those little sampan boats, you know. The course of the journey with a wife and 5 children, 2 of the children died. My God, said the rabbi, what could be worse than that? Oh, yes, said the gentleman through a translator. Of course, he said, our dilemma was, do we throw these children overboard because the stench is so tremendous? Do we bury them? What do we do? What could be worse? What possibly could be worse? Said the rabbi. And the man said, there was something worse. There was something worse. In the night, in the day, as we came across the China Sea, we were passed by the oil tankers, and the men came to the oil tankers, and because this was a big story in the national and international media, people were pointing at us. There's one of those families. There's one of those families. There's one of those families. And that they saw us and did nothing about us was worse even for this gentleman than the loss of 2 children. Now, the thing that I want to leave you with is my gratefulness to these 2 remarkable women. You have almost begun to change my feeling about the American government. And I am very pleased to hear that President Bush is on our side on this one. But I'm also grateful to Joe Collins and to Brigitte Cazalis Collins, who have brought to my attention this fabulous organization called Maiti Nepal that you can reach, and friends of MaitiNepal.org. They have looked, they have seen, they have met the gaze, they have responded to the summons, and they will do it for eternity. I thank you all for attending.